The stink of bleach clung to Claudette's clothes like memory, sharp, bitter, and impossible to wash out. Her hands ached from 10 hours of folding, lifting, repeating. Each step home felt like dragging her own shadow through the soot-caked streets of Mason's Bend. But it wasn't fatigue that made her stop by the river that night. It was the silence. Jonah sat where he always did, near the lip of Red Creek, just past the rusted fence, where the factory runoff turned the water milky and slow. His small hands stacked river stones into trembling towers. He didn't look up as she approached, but she could see the smudge of grime on his cheek and the hole in his left shoe. Her brother hadn't spoken a word in over 3 years, not since the night siren split the sky, and their father never came home. "Time to go," she murmured, voice dry. Jonah glanced at her but didn't move. A distant whistle screamed from the train yard. The night air turned heavy with the weight of storms. Thunder rolled low, like a voice forgotten. "Now, Joe?" He looked at her, finally, eyes glassy but calm, then pointed. Beyond the riverbank, tangled in weeds and kudzu, lay the remnants of the old mill shelter, a place no one talked about. Claudette barely remembered it herself. A concrete husk with no roof, its metal door rusted open, the walls scrawled with graffiti and time. She had never dared step inside. The first drops of rain began to fall. Jonah ran ahead, toward the shelter. Cursing under her breath, Claudette followed, ducking through the warped frame and into the shadows. Inside, it smelled like rot and copper. Claudette's flashlight flickered, catching on broken glass and forgotten cans. The floor was slick with moss and old soot. She moved toward Jonah, who crouched by a corner where floorboards once covered a crawl space now exposed. Something caught her eye, a shape wedged between bricks. She knelt, pulled it free. A tin box, dented and streaked with mold. She hesitated. "Probably rats," she muttered. Jonah said nothing. He simply watched, wide-eyed. The lid groaned open. Inside, paper. Dozens of pages, water-warped but still legible. Ink bled in places, but the words remained. She lifted the top page. Her name wasn't on it, but her father's was. June 3rd, 1949. "Leonard says we shouldn't keep writing. Says words get people killed. But if we don't write, who will know what they done?" The breath caught in her throat. Her father's name. Her father's voice, through another man's hand. She turned another page. They moved the body without saying nothing. Just took him like trash. Buried him behind the boiler room. Nobody cried loud. We all got mouths full of dust. Claudette stared. The air pressed in around her, damp and pulsing. Jonah reached for her hand, his fingers cold. Outside, lightning split the sky. The river behind them hissed. She should have thrown the box back, left it to rot with everything else time buried. But instead, she held it tighter. Behind her, water kept moving slow, choked, and unseen. Claudette didn't know it yet, but she had just unburied a story the town tried to drown. And the river? The river doesn't forget. The box lived under Claudette's bed now, tucked between floorboards that groaned like secrets when stepped on wrong. She read the pages late at night, after Jonah had fallen asleep with his arms around his pillow like it could keep the world from tilting. The journal wasn't neat. Some pages were scrawled, others smudged beyond recognition. Names appeared and disappeared, initials, nicknames, words crossed out in angry slashes. But one name showed up again and again. Bernard R. He hadn't written for glory. The sentences were jagged, hurried. Some sounded like confessions. Others like warnings. You keep things quiet long enough, they start screaming anyway. Most of the entries circled the same place, the Roosevelt Mill. Before it was integrated, before folks like Claudette were allowed to touch its doors without fear of being shoved out. The journal told of men beaten for asking questions, of women fired for speaking up, of night shifts that ended in silence, with one less name on the roll call by morning. And then, buried like a thorn, Leonard Miles came to the meeting. Quiet man. Knew numbers better than any of us. Said they changing the logs. Said they hiding the bodies and math. She read that line 5 times. Her father hadn't spoken much, even before he disappeared. But when he did, it was always with care, like words were bricks in a house he didn't want to collapse. Claudette ran her finger across the page. A name. A night. A hint. She didn't tell anyone about the journal, not Miss Hattie from the church, not even Evie, her closest friend since childhood. Trust was a dangerous currency in Mason's Bend. People bought survival with silence. But questions started slipping from her anyway. Miss Hattie, did you ever work at Roosevelt before the merger? The old woman narrowed her eyes. That mill ain't changed. Just changed the sign. I heard some folks went missing back then. Miss Hattie didn't blink. Baby, some folks still go missing. We just don't ask loud. At the mill, Claudette's movements became mechanical. Fold, lift, stack, smile when spoken to. But her mind lived somewhere else now, in the basement of memory, beneath broken floorboards, among ghosts made of ink and blood. She noticed things she hadn't before, the way Foreman Cole always stared too long. The quiet fear in older workers' eyes when certain years were mentioned. The crooked plaque on the breakroom wall that read Pride in Progress since 1968, though the mill had existed long before. And Jonah was drawing again. He brought her a torn page from his sketch pad, pressed into her palm without words. It showed a stick figure standing under a crooked tree, beside a shape that might have been a furnace or a tomb. Overhead, thick black lines clouded the sky. Where'd you see this? She asked gently. He pointed to the journal box, then to the door. Claudette's skin prickled. Jonah couldn't read. That night, she returned to the shelter alone. Rain had washed the weeds flat, but the air still tasted of rust. She walked through the ruin with a flashlight, scanning every crack. At the rear wall, hidden behind collapsed bricks, she saw it, faint but there, chalk marks. A symbol, letters worn away. It matched Jonah's drawing. She didn't sleep that night. The next morning, as she stepped into the mill, she caught Darnell Cole watching her, the kind of stare that peeled skin back. Slow. He smiled without teeth. You're working hard these days, Miles. Digging up something? She kept her voice even. Just trying to stay on my feet. His grin faded. Best not a trip then. She nodded, walked on. But her legs felt heavier than ever. She had started a fire, small and quiet. The kind no one saw until the walls began to blacken. And deep in her bones, Claudette knew. Whatever the truth was, it wasn't just buried. It was guarded. The boiler room had always been off limits. Not by rule, but by fear, the kind passed through glances and old warnings, not written in any manual. Workers whispered about the heat back there, the noise, the machines that wheezed like dying lungs. But they never mentioned what lay behind the farthest tank, past the cracked foundation. Claudette only heard it in fragments, back when things were different, before the accident, where they kept the old ones quiet. She hadn't meant to go near it, but the journal kept pulling her toward places she'd been taught not to see. It started with a name, Thomas E. Dot, written on the bottom of a page like a scratched confession. Thomas said he saw it, said the wall moved. Next day he didn't come back. Claudette waited until her shift ended. The factory emptied slowly, like breath leaving a dying thing. She lingered in the shadows until the lights dimmed and the machine slept. Her footsteps echoed in the silence. Down the service stairwell, past storage, into the lowest part of the mill. The boiler room growled. Steam hissed through pipes like whispers too hot to hold. Claudette moved carefully, hugging the wall. Her flashlight flickered, then steadied. Then she saw it. A section of brick, misaligned. Blacker than the rest. Different mortar. Claudette stepped closer. Raised her hand. The surface felt wrong. Almost soft. She pressed. A hollow sound. She backed away, heart thudding. Don't. The voice behind her was gravel. She spun. Mr. Lewis, the janitor, stood in the dark, mop in hand. He was in his 60s, his eyes sunken but alert. You don't want that kind of knowing, he said. She swallowed. What's back there? He didn't answer. Just looked at the wall, then at her. You think your daddy was special? What? You think they only did it once? The heat in the room seemed to press down on her lungs. She couldn't move. They took men. Men who asked questions. Men who stayed too long after clockout. You see a man disappear, you learn to stop looking. Or you end up with your name erased too. She wanted to speak, but her mouth was dry. Leave it alone, he said, quieter now. Ain't nothing back there but ghosts too tired to speak. Claudette nodded, not in agreement, but because her knees trembled and it was all she could do to stay upright. Back at home, she didn't speak to Jonah. She sat with the journal open in her lap, pages rustling from the fan. Bernard had written about a door, a hidden chamber behind the boiler, a space where they think we won't matter. Claudette didn't sleep that night. The next morning, Darnell Cole was waiting at her station, smiling again. You take a wrong turn last night? He asked, voice dipped in oil. I stayed late, she said flatly. Making up time. Funny. Ain't no cameras in that part of the building. But I always know who don't belong. She said nothing. He stepped closer. You dig deep enough, girl, you gonna find something that bites back. His words hung in the air like sulfur. She didn't respond. But when he walked away, her hands shook. Not from fear, from fury. Later, Jonah handed her another drawing. This one showed a girl holding a box, flames behind her, faces without mouths in the background. She folded the page gently, kissed his forehead. Then she went to the back room, pulled out the journal, and began copying pages by hand, line by line, word by fading word. If the mill was going to erase stories, she would make copies the fire couldn't eat. And if ghosts were trapped behind that wall, she was going to speak for them before someone made her one of them. By the time the posters went up, the whole town was already pretending it didn't remember what it had been. Progress in motion. Senator Thomas Hawley visits Roosevelt Mill, August 9th. Claudette saw the first flyer stapled to the telephone pole outside Carter's Market, its red, white, and blue ink already bleeding from the heat. Underneath the smiling senator's face were the words, a look at integration done right. Integration. She thought about the men who whispered warnings, about the names in the journal followed by dates and nothing else. About her father. If this was integration, she wondered, what did erasure look like? At the mill, everything changed overnight. Floors scrubbed spotless. New signs hammered into place. Uniforms were pressed. Even Darnell Cole started wearing a tie. The workers, especially the black ones, were told to smile more, to speak less, to show the senator how far we've come. Evie noticed too. They sat together on Claudette's stoop that night, watching Jonah sketch trees in silence. He's not coming to see us, Evie said. He's coming to see what they want him to see, Claudette replied. Evie looked at her sideways. You still got that thing? Claudette nodded. I'm copying the pages. Slowly. You gonna show them? I want to. Evie leaned in. Wanting and doing ain't the same. Claudette stared ahead. The air was thick with heat and the distant buzz of street lamps. I think they killed my daddy. Evie was silent for a long time. You think we didn't all lose someone in that place? That cut deeper than Claudette expected. I'm not trying to be bigger than this town, she said softly. But I can't be smaller than it either. Evie stood. Then you better be ready. 'Cause the minute you open your mouth, they'll remind you just how small they want you. That night, Claudette laid out the copies on her bedroom floor. Some pages were warped from her sweat, others smudged where her fingers shook. But the words held. Names. Dates. Disappeared. She folded them carefully, slid them into an envelope. Wrote no return address. Just one line. For those you forgot. She walked it to the post office the next morning, sent it to the Birmingham Tribune, the only paper she knew with a black editor. 2 days passed. The mill buzzed with rehearsals, speeches, greetings, the script of progress. Darnell Cole walked taller, smiling like a man who thought he buried every secret. Then the Tribune published the letter. Not the whole journal, just a section. Anonymized. But enough to burn. 3 workers didn't show up that day. Mr. Lewis didn't speak to her when they passed in the hall. And Claudette felt the eyes, heavy, frightened, furious. That afternoon, Cole called her into his office. He said nothing at first. Just stared. You think you're clever? She didn't answer. You think this noise helps anyone? She met his eyes. Helps them be seen. He slammed a file onto the desk. You're done here. She nodded. I figured. As she stood to leave, he sneered. You think people thank you? You'll go back to scrubbing floors like the rest of them. If they even let you stay. Claudette paused in the doorway. Better to scrub the floor clean than keep covering blood with paint. That night, she walked home with no paycheck, no job, and no clue what would come next. But for the first time in years, she didn't feel powerless. Just exposed. Like a wound the air finally found. The envelope arrived 2 days after she lost her job. It bore no return address, just her name in block letters, Claudette Miles. The postmark was smudged. Inside, a folded clipping from the Birmingham Tribune and a note in slanted handwriting. You weren't wrong to ask. You just weren't supposed to. No signature. No clue who had sent it. Claudette reread the clipping again. It was her words, reshaped, retitled, but hers. The names listed under a record of vanishing were only a few from the journal, but each one was now public. Seen. Real. She carried the clipping to the riverbank, where Jonah was arranging his usual cairns of rock and stick. He didn't look up, but when she sat beside him, he nudged a flat stone toward her, one he'd drawn on in charcoal. A row of 5 figures, standing shoulder to shoulder, all faceless. Claudette placed the clipping beneath it. They have names now, she whispered. Jonah rested his hand on hers. The contact was brief but deliberate. That evening, she pulled out the journal again. This time, she wasn't looking for proof. She was looking for answers. Clues. A pattern emerged. Each name was followed by vague shifts, transferred, relocated, left suddenly. But none of them had been seen again. She began searching death records at the library 2 blocks from Mason's Bend. Quiet place. Few patrons. The old clerk, a pale woman with large glasses, didn't ask questions when Claudette requested microfilm from the late 40s and early 50s. Hours passed in the humming dark of the viewing booth. Her eyes burned from squinting. But eventually, the pieces aligned. Leonard Miles. Death certificate dated April 1950. Cause, industrial mishap. No further details. No obituary. No funeral record. She remembered her mother's silence when she asked, years ago, what happened to Daddy? He went into work and never came back, she'd said. That's all you need to know. Now Claudette knew why her mother never said more. Why Mr. Lewis wouldn't meet her eyes. Why names disappeared without questions. They were erased. Made invisible by routine paperwork, polite lies, and the slow grind of time. And worse, no one outside the Bend ever looked. She left the library with photocopies in her hand and a storm growing in her chest. That night, she pinned every name from the journal on the wall of their room. She connected them with yarn, with notes, with her father at the center. Jonah watched from the bed, then picked up a marker. Without a word, he added a small star beside each name. Why? She asked. He tapped his chest, then signed, remembered. She closed her eyes, the weight of it settling in her ribs. The next morning, she tried to speak with Reverend Thomas at the church. He was kind but cautious. Sister Miles, I admire your strength, but this town runs on order. Stir too hard and folks won't listen. They'll just fear. Let him fear, she said. If it makes him look. Still, he gave her space to post the list on the church's community board. She pinned it with shaking hands. As she turned to leave, she saw Miss Hattie staring. The old woman didn't speak, but she reached out, touched Claudette's shoulder, and nodded once. Back at home, she found Jonah sitting by the window. He held out another drawing, a girl holding fire in one hand, paper in the other, standing on a cliff. Below, a crowd watched. Some in awe, some in anger, but none with their backs turned. Claudette kissed the top of his head. Maybe they'll see. The next day, a reporter from the Tribune arrived. A young black man in a brown suit. He spoke low and kind. You the one who sent those pages? She hesitated, then nodded. I want the whole story, he said. She handed him the journal. Then you need to hear their voices, too. The story ran front page. The Roosevelt Files, Hidden Histories in Alabama's Crown Mill. It spread farther than Claudette ever expected. The Tribune printed testimonies from the journal, listed dates, reprinted her father's death certificate beside 3 others with matching causes and matching absences of detail. The reporter didn't name Claudette, but everyone in Mason's Bend knew. At first, there was quiet. Then came the lockdown. Roosevelt Mill shut its doors for internal investigation. Federal inspectors were flown in. Senator Hawley postponed his visit. White men in suits circled town like vultures smelling rot under the roses. And Jonah went missing. It was just after dusk. She had sent him to the corner store for bread, 20 minutes tops. But night fell, and he didn't come back. Claudette ran through the streets, shouting his name, face slick with sweat and fear. She knocked on neighbors' doors, flagged down strangers. Nothing. Then, near the creek, past the same rusted fence, she saw him. Kneeling in the mud, hands deep in the wet earth. He was building something again. A house. Not with sticks this time, with stones. A careful rectangle. One small window. A line of ash across the threshold. She dropped to her knees beside him, breathing hard. He didn't cry. He didn't speak. But when she touched his arm, he leaned against her. "It's Daddy's," he signed, then pointed across the river. Claudette turned. In the dim light, across the water, barely visible beneath the trees, stood the outline of a foundation. Cracked cement, overgrown, but unmistakable. She had never seen it before. Later that night, she marked it on her wall. A map. A memory. A place they tried to bury. The next day, she returned to the mill gates. They were chained. Men in uniform stood guard. She asked for her final paycheck. They handed her a sealed envelope. No eye contact. No words. Inside, a voucher. No explanation. They weren't going to pay her for telling the truth. But they couldn't erase her anymore, either. That evening, she went to Reverend Thomas again. "I want to speak," she said. "To who?" "Everyone." He paused. "They might not listen." "Maybe. But they'll hear me." He gave her the pulpit for Sunday. 1 hour. She spent the next 2 nights preparing. Not a sermon, a list. A reckoning. Jonah sat nearby as she practiced, nodding when she read certain names, shaking when she stumbled. At one point, he took the paper and underlined a line. "They thought we would forget." Sunday morning came hot and clear. The church was full. The air buzzed with unease. Claudette walked to the front slowly, heart thudding. She unfolded the list, breathed, spoke. One name, then another, then a line from the journal, then a name again. No fire, no shouting, just her voice. Steady, slow. Leonard Miles. Industrial mishap. No body, no service. Thomas E. Walked into work. Never came out. They moved the body like it was waste. Some people bowed their heads. Others stared. A few left, but many stayed. When she finished, there was no applause. Just silence. Heavy, aching silence. Reverend Thomas stepped forward. He didn't speak either. Just placed a single white candle on the altar. Lit it. Then another person did the same. Then another. 12 candles. 12 names. Jonah walked up last, carrying a stone. Placed it beneath the flame. Then took his sister's hand. Outside, the sky darkened with clouds. But Claudette felt lighter. Like something heavy had lifted from her chest, floated upward, and didn't come down. They hadn't won. But they weren't hidden anymore. The senator came anyway. Not with cameras and reporters as planned, but quietly, 3 weeks late, with no speech, no smiles. The Roosevelt Mill's gates stayed shut. The inspectors still hadn't finished their review. Rumors buzzed like hornets, misfiled records, falsified injuries, workers relocated without explanation. Nothing proved murder. But truth rarely wore a name tag. Claudette didn't wait to be invited. She stood at the gates the morning of his visit, copies of the journal pages folded under her arm, standing in the dress her mother once called her Sunday best. It no longer fit her body right, but it fit her intent. Jonah came too. He carried his drawings, every one of the nameless, faceless people he'd ever sketched. A silent army. A crowd had gathered. Mostly black workers. Some curious. Others tight-lipped. And then, there he was, the senator, tall, gray-suited, flanked by aides who looked like they couldn't smell the smoke still clinging to the ground. Claudette stepped forward. No one stopped her. "Sir," she said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "before you call this place a success, you ought to know who's missing." The aides moved. But Holly lifted a hand. And who are you, miss? She met his gaze. Claudette Miles. My daddy worked here. Leonard Miles. He never came home. A murmur moved through the crowd. She handed him the pages. He glanced at them briefly. Too briefly. These are allegations, one aide said sharply. Unverified. They're records, Claudette replied. Made by a man who died telling the truth. You're disrupting a federal. I'm answering a silence. Her voice trembled, but her spine held. You can tour the new floors. Shake hands. But until you know what's buried under those boilers, this place ain't progress. It's a graveyard with a payroll. The aide moved again. Jonah stepped in front of his sister, holding up one drawing, the one with the stone house and the girl standing in flames. The senator paused, looked down at Jonah, looked again, then folded the pages and said nothing. When they walked away, Claudette didn't feel victorious. But she hadn't expected victory. Only truth. And truth had teeth. That night, the wind shifted. A small fire sparked behind the shuttered east wing of the mill. By dawn, half the rear structure had collapsed. Firemen said it was electrical. Old wiring. Claudette knew better. So did Mr. Lewis, who appeared on her porch that morning, eyes rimmed red. They're covering it, he said. Again. She offered him water. He didn't take it. Just sat, staring at the ground. I remember Leonard, he finally said. He asked numbers nobody wanted answered. He tried, she said. He did more than try. He listened. We all talked, but he kept the records. They got him for that. She looked out across the yard where Jonah had drawn another row of faceless figures in chalk. I got his voice now. Mr. Lewis stood. Then don't let them take it. That Sunday, the candles at church were lit again. More names added. People began whispering stories long buried. Women spoke of missing brothers, sons. Men fired for asking about payroll. Claudette listened, wrote, kept adding. No news cameras came. No headlines followed. But people in Mason's bin started looking each other in the eye again. Started calling names, not just nodding past absence. And when Claudette walked past Red Creek, people no longer averted their eyes. The wind no longer carried only ash. It carried something heavier and more alive. The foundation across the river never stopped calling her. Some nights, she'd find Jonah already there, arranging stones, humming tunelessly to the water. He never explained what he built, and she never asked. It felt like something between prayer and memory, and she honored both. The mill never reopened. Official word was restructuring, but everyone knew. The story had seeped too deep. It didn't burn with outrage, just smoldered in whispers and side glances, and empty parking lots and padlocked doors. The new generation passed the gates without wonder. The old ones looked away. But at the creek's edge, people started gathering. First it was Jonah and Claudette. Then Evie. Then Reverend Thomas. One Sunday, Claudette brought the journal, not the original, but her copy, water-resistant pages bound by careful thread. She read aloud from the first entry. June 3rd, 1949. Leonard says we shouldn't keep writing. Says words get people killed. But if we don't write, who will know what they done? Behind her, someone murmured amen. They built a bench from old timber. Evie painted the names onto stones. A boy carved initials into tree bark. People left candles, photos, scraps of cloth. No plaque. No press. Just presence. A year later, the city quietly rerouted the sidewalk past Red Creek. Put up a small sign, historical marker, site of early industrial labor. It said nothing of race, of silence, of ghosts. But the town knew better. One morning, Claudette found Jonah standing by the bench, sketchpad in hand. He handed her a picture, the clearest he'd ever drawn. A woman standing with her back to a factory, facing a river. In her hands, a stone and a page. Around her, faces watched. None were blank. She touched his cheek. You remember them too? He nodded. Then for the first time in years, he whispered. Just one word. Daddy. Her breath caught. She held him tight, the air thick with the weight of too much waiting. That night, she began a new journal. The first page held no date. Just one sentence. We are not lost. We are carried. Outside, The river moved slowly past the bend, tugging at reeds and roots. And beneath its murmur, the town could still hear them. The ones who built without blueprints. The ones who worked without names. The ones who refused to vanish. The river remembered. And now, so did they.